through. Actually, we got to ER, and now we're going to get to Sivan, right?
Oh.
Yes, ER was a month that didn't have very much going on except for Lag BaOmer.
It's hot.
It's
It's hot then, right?
hot. It's hot, yeah. In ER, we've got the whole of Sfiras HaOmer, and then we move into Rosh Chodesh Sivan. Sivan is a month that's got Shavuot inside of it. Shavuot, of course, is the festival that commemorates the giving of the Torah to the Jewish people.
Which is great for lactose intolerant.
It's great for lactose intolerant people to be able to exercise their strength of will and not eat cheesecake. Yes.
I love me a good cheesecake.
Pardon?
Love me a good cheesecake.
Anyway, what happened? So we've got the 3 days preceding Shavuot are called Shloshit V'mei Hagbalah. They are the preparation days for the receiving of the Torah. In the Chumash it says that when the Jewish people arrived at Har Sinai, so they had to separate from their wives, and they had to wash their clothing, and they had to get themselves ready spiritually in order to be able to receive the Torah. So we also have a little bit of preparation that takes place over there. There's a build-up towards the receiving of the Torah. And then on the 6th of Sivan is Shavuot. Now, Shavuot is a very interesting festival. It's one of the 3 foot festivals, but it's a very short festival. Here in Israel, it's only 1 day long. In Chutz La'aretz, outside of Israel, it lasts for 2 days. This year, as we worked out yesterday, right? This year, it's going to be on Motzei Shabbos, which means that we've got Shabbos before it, and then Sunday will be Shavuot. For those of you that are going to keep 2 days, that means you've got a 3-dayer ahead of you, which is Shabbat, and then Sunday and Monday. For the rest of us, it'll be 1 day. No, it's not Shabbos, it's on Sunday. It's a day after Shabbos, yeah.
So it's 2 days, really. Then.
2 days.
So what qualifies you to keep 1 day, or qualifies you?
If you're gonna
If you live in Israel, then keeping 1 day. What's living in Israel? It's a good question,
we have
actually.
an apartment. I mean, I've got an apartment in Herzliya. My parents have an apartment. So why therefore I only
Well,
got 1 day?
But you don't know.
The
Do you have
basic.
citizenship here?
No, that's not a definition of whether a person should be keeping 1 or 2 days. Although it must be said, when I was a kid growing up in London, there were shlichim there from the Sochnut and from Bnei Akiva they'd been in England for like 20 years and they were still keeping 1 day of Yom Tov. So no, that's not what's going to do it. There are different things over here. If a person's going to be in Israel for all 3 foot festivals, which is Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, and they have an apartment over here, then they could probably keep only 1 day. That sounds like a reason to keep only 1 day. I would suggest that you just speak to Rav Samit first, just to have him tell you, officially that it's okay. Amongst the Sfardim, it's a little bit easier. At the Ashkenazim, a little bit more stringent about whether you should or whether you shouldn't keep 1 day or 2 days. By the Sfardim, it's a little bit easier. If you're here for what? You were here for Sukkot. You were here already? No. And you'll be here. Pesach, you'll be here. Probably, and Shavuot, maybe.
That's it. Yeah.
That's an if. I don't know. Ask your, maybe ask Rav Peretz or something over here what to do. But it's definitely amongst the Sfardim, it's normally a little bit easier. The leniency for keeping 1 day as opposed to keeping 2 days. Whatever he says, that's okay. But back to Shavuot. What are we commemorating on Shavuot? So on Shavuot is not the day that the 10 Commandments were given. It's a misconception. On Shavuot, the Torah was given to the Jewish people. We stood at Har Sinai.
Wait, so on Shavuot we got the 10 Commandments.
On Shavuot, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us the 10 Commandments verbally. He did not give us the 10 Commandments physically. Right? Moshe did not come down with the 2 tablets of stone on Shavuot. Shavuot is the day when the Jewish people said Nasa v'nishma, that we'll do and we'll do and we'll learn, and then HaKadosh Baruch Hu started to give them the 10 Commandments, like we learned in last week's Parshas Yisro, right at the end, where it describes what took place over there, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the 10 Commandments verbally to the Jewish people. Right?
Technically, he gave only like 3 of them to the Jewish people.
Technically, he himself gave 2 of them,
Yeah.
and the other 8 came through Moshe Rabbeinu. But nevertheless, we understand that when Moshe Rabbeinu gives over the 10 Commandments, we know that it's coming from God. Pardon?
No, I'm saying, we just agree.
Oh, okay, good. So, Halavai should happen more often, no? There is a custom on Shavuot. Again, Shavuot itself is a regular Yom Tov, so the prayers on Shavuot night are going to be festive prayers. There is a custom on the night of Shavuot to stay up all night learning Torah. Now I'm looking around the room and I can see how enthusiastic you are about that idea.
I have a question.
Yes.
If you're holding 2 days, do you have to stay up both nights?
No, you only stay up the first night of Shavuot, although if you stay up the first night of Shavuot learning Torah and then sleep during the day, you'll probably find yourself up on the second night simply for technical reasons, not because you're supposed to be learning, but because...
What do the yeshiva normally do?
What the yeshiva will do is they'll have an all-night learning seminar over here. There'll be different shiurim going on. There'll be people learning by themselves. There'll be people learning with chavrusas. There'll be people giving shiurim. And at some point, pretty early on, probably around 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, some of the yeshiva anyway will start making its way down to the kotel to daven over there, right, to pray over there in the morning. They'll daven nates. The nates, again, we're talking about summertime, so the nates is reasonably early. At that point, it's probably around 5:30 or something. No tefillin because it's Yom Tov. So there's a custom to learn Torah all night. Where does the custom come from? So the sages explain like this, that on Shavuot morning, when God wanted to come and give the Jewish people the Torah, the Jewish people were still asleep. And they had to be woken up. One of the reasons, it said in the Medrash, one of the reasons that God used lightning and thunder was to waken everybody up. Anyway, on Shavuot night, so in order to try to repay the mistake that the Jewish people made by not waking up early enough to be able to get to Har Sinai, to be able to receive the Torah from God on Shavuot, there's a custom to learn Torah all night long. Again, it's a very beautiful custom. If you're capable of doing it, then for sure you should do it. But if it's going to cause you not to be able to pray properly in the morning, then you should learn Torah on Shavuot night and then make sure that you get yourself some sleep as well to be able to pray properly, because ultimately what you don't want is to stay up all night and find yourself falling asleep the whole time during davening. There is a custom on Shavuot morning to read the Megillah of Ruth. Right? Megillas Ruth tells over the story, very famous story of Ruth. She came from Moab and she converted to Judaism. There's a whole story that precedes it. It's a very sad story that of a family that came down to, they were running away from a famine over here in Eretz Yisrael, and people started dying and whatever. She follows her mother-in-law back to Israel, and she gets married to somebody called Boaz. One of the reasons why we read Megillas Rus on Shavuos is because the end of Megillas Rus tells us about the birth of David HaMelech, King David. King David was born on Shavuot. King David died on Shavuot 70 years later. And the whole concept of the giving of the Torah and the Davidic dynasty of the Mashiach is something which is very much, something that we're all waiting for. The more Torah we learn, the greater is the opportunity for the Mashiach to be able to come.
Everybody read the Megillah? Or is it just a literature?
No. It's read by everybody. It's one of the 5 Megillas that are read throughout the year. Here, Rabbi say, just an interesting thing that Alex just brought up. There's a custom to learn from Pesach until Sukkot. On Shabbat afternoon, there's a custom to learn Pirkei Avot, right? Ethics of the Fathers. Where does that come from? So actually, the custom is a very interesting custom because the summer days are very long. So the summer afternoon, Shabbos afternoon, is very long, and in order to try to stop people from gathering together and just speaking, either ridiculous things like talking about the football scores, or perhaps even worse, talking about other people, right? To try to sort of like to have people utilize the time properly, the custom arose to learn Pirkei Avot, and there's one chapter learned every week. There are 6 chapters in Pirkei Avot, and it repeats itself, over and over. If you're running out of time, so normally the last 2 Shabbos, sometimes they'll learn 2 chapters instead of 1, just to make sure that by the time you get to Sukkot, you've finished up and you got to the
How
end.
many are you supposed to be doing a day?
Huh?
A week? How many a
No,
week?
just under normal circumstances, one chapter a week.
What's a chapter?
Doesn't matter
A
what
chapter, there are 6 chapters, which means it's already split up. When you
So
open
what
up
would you do?
Pirkei
What would
Avot,
you do?
Most of the time you have
Only
a
6
rabbi.
weeks.
no, then you go back to the beginning.
So you
You
learn
have
it
So
six
you
six
learn-
months,
you
and
learn
have
it-
a month per.
But surely then you
Overall.
can do like perics of it a day.
In the
a
United
week.
States,
Huh?
you have
Surely you should do perics of it a
The
week.
United States.
No, so here, what they do is like this. You do one perik per week,
Yeah.
and then when if you see that it's not going to fit in exactly, so towards the end, you'll end up learning one Shabbos or 2 Shabbos, you'll end up learning 2 chapters instead.
Nice idea.
most of the time the shuls in the United States, the rabbi gives Pirkei Avos in the afternoon, which is very.
Yeah, I don't know. You see, in the southern hemisphere, I don't know what they do. Maybe they learn it between the other way around, right? Maybe they learn it between Sukkot and Pesach, because over there it's their summer. It's their summer then.
In England, they learn it in between the football matches.
In between the scores, right?
Exactly. That's a
Right, speaking of the southern hemisphere, isn't like, for example, Sukkot has to be in the winter, right? So we could show one of the reasons for Sukkot
Who
being...
was speaking about the southern hemisphere?
You are.
Ah, yeah, okay. Yeah, so the
Is that a problem?
it's an interesting question. The festivals are built according to the northern hemisphere seasons, right? Which means that Pesach is always going to be in the spring, our spring, and Sukkot is always going to be at the end of the summer, our summer, right? In the southern hemisphere, they're gonna celebrate Pesach exactly the same time as we do, and Sukkot exactly the same time as we do, but because their year is the other way around, it means that Pesach is going to be at the end of their summer, and Sukkot is going to be at the beginning of their summer. All kinds of interesting questions over there about, when you change over, after Pesach over here, we change over and we start saying we start saying Moed Atal, and we stop saying Mashavor Moed Geshem, that you should bring the rain, and then in Sukkot we start saying it again, and in the southern hemisphere, all kinds of halachic questions. In the southern hemisphere, are you allowed to pray for rain when it's the summer over there? Right? That means that you're asking for rain in the wrong time, and it's not going to be beneficial. So the approach of the poskim is, the approach of the halachic authorities is that really the essence of the tefillah that we're asking for rain is for over here in Eretz Yisrael. And at the time when Eretz Yisrael needs rain, it's okay for people in the southern hemisphere to pray for rain as well. Yeah.
Where did the idea of milk the whole milky food come from?
Cow.
No, but why do you eat all service food? What?
Ah, yeah, that's not what you asked. You asked, where does milky food come from?
No, so where does the idea of milky food come from?
From a cow.
The idea.
Conceptual, yes. It's all conceptual.
Isn't it because
Great answer.
at the time of Shavuos we didn't have any meat or anything available? So
Yes.
Yeah, so they cooked
Yes.
dairy meals and stuff.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, let's have a look. Let's have a look and see what I can see.
Right.
That this milking business is stirring up a lot of interest
But
over
they
here,
go to
right?
meat after they have a soup.
Let's have a look and see. So here, like Ben so eloquently put it, when we got to Har Sinai, the laws of kashrus hadn't been given yet, which means that that the Jewish people weren't able to eat meat until after the Torah was given. And then at that point, they were able to start eating meat, which is why there's a custom to eat dairy products on Shavuot. Now, again, I'm emphasizing it's only a custom, which means if you prefer to eat meat, then you should eat meat, right? If you enjoy eating dairy, then you should eat dairy for sure. If you're lactose intolerant, then it's probably not a great thing to do.
No.
If you don't want to end up in the emergency ward on Shavuot. Anyway, so there is a custom to eat. Hold on a second. There's a custom to eat dairy. If you're going to eat dairy, so the emphasis is like this: the best way to eat dairy is on Shavuot night, because the sages say that on Yom Tov day you should eat meat, because it says Ein simcha ela b'basar v'yayin, that the best way to reach a level of simcha is to have meat and to drink wine. Therefore, many people have the custom to eat dairy on Shavuot night and to eat meat on Shavuot morning. Many people have the custom to have a dairy, so even if they eat meat at night, they'll have a dairy kiddush in the morning before they eat their fleishik meal, before they eat their meaty meal on Shavuot day. There is no mitzvah to eat cheesecake on Shavuot, which means if you want to, you may do so, and if you don't want to, you do not have to do so. It's not something which has to be done. Okay? If you're like me, I love dairy. I prefer it much more than meat, but I do not like cheesecake.
You don't like cheesecake?
How do you know that?
You just
That's a
told us.
very personal thing. I wasn't aware of you being...
He also doesn't like hot drinks.
Right. So I thought the idea of eating meat was introduced after Noah's flood, right?
Yeah.
So people were eating meat.
Yeah,
How come
which
they weren't
means
eating
like this: that the permission to eat meat was given to Noah when he came out after the flood, and he looked after the animals. So what the pasuk says over there, that God gave Noah permission to eat meat. So the idea of eating.
No.
Eating meat.
Exactly. Like I said, the idea of eat was was there already, generations before, by the time of Noah. However, the Jewish people, understanding that they were going to be given laws of kashrus, right before Shavuot, they weren't able to eat meat because they were in a little bit of in between state, and therefore they just stuck with dairy whilst they waited to find out how to be able to do this, how to kasher their utensils, and then how to kasher meat as well. And that's where the minute again, it's only a custom, right? You don't have to don't take this personally.
So
It's
they
not
didn't,
like,
no. I just want to understand. So they didn't eat meat ever since the Korban Pesach until during the Torah. There was no meat.
you know what? I don't know. There's no. I don't.
I think it was all manna. They only ate manna from
Mine.
Pesach to
The
Shavuot.
Korban Pesach was kosher.
Korban Pesach for sure was kosher.
Which one? The first one?
Yeah.
But you didn't have the last sheet yet.
Huh?
You didn't have the last sheet yet. The tradition, maybe.
Certainly, it says over there for sure in the Medrash. It says absolutely that Moshe shechted his korban.
But he had, was the only tradition from Avinu, no?
Let me look into it. I know. Let me look into it. Let's try to work out what's going on over here, the chronology. But
The ram,
Say that.
Yitzchak,
huh?
by the Akedah.
Yeah,
What did he do? Avram Shechter's.
yeah. But over there, he offered the whole thing up, shechted. Again, Avram Avinu for sure was shechting animals for sure, according to halacha, because he kept the halacha, right? The korban Pesach that was eaten in Mitzrayim, for sure it was shechted the way that it was supposed to be. The kasher over here is, before they got to Har Sinai, what were they eating?
No.
They were eating the man, right?
But they had their flocks.
They
with
had
them, no?
flocks, had masses of flocks with them.
So
yeah.
could they have eaten?
They could have done. They didn't eat it. It's interesting. It says, later on with the quails, right? When they asked God to send them meat. So God looks at that as being a great trial, right? That they rebelled against him by asking for meat. So the commentaries explain, of course it was a rebellion because they didn't have to ask God to give. They had plenty of meat that they could have used, their own meat. They had their own animals. So if anybody fancied a quick steak or a lamb chop or something, they could have just shechted one of their own animals, and cooked that. By coming to ask God to provide the meat for them, that was a rebellion against God, which is they came out.
Har Sinai?
Yeah, they came out with masses and masses of
Oh,
flocks.
I think I know why. That is a rebellion because now that the laws of kashrut has been given to you, why do you need me to?
Yeah.
But before then, maybe the Jews were being more stringent on themselves.
Maybe. Let me look into it.
I did all that.
Hey, he's gonna tell his mummy to watch this, right? It's like, Anyway, Shavuot is a fascinating festival because there's nothing happens on Shavuot. We've got Pesach, so anybody who knows anything about Pesach, you'll know, the first of all, the build-up to Pesach is enormous. Pesach itself, not having any chametz in the house and eating the matzahs and everything, it's just, you know that it's Pesach, right?
It's enough. Shavuot's enough.
Hold on a second, Sukkot, right? Again, you're living in the Sukkah, it's interesting that Sukkot, the sages explain that there are two mitzvot that a person does with their entire body. One of them is Sukkot, right? You go with your entire body into the Sukkah and you live inside of the Sukkah for 7 days. And the other one is Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, living in the land of Israel. Right? You live in the land of Israel with your entire body. Right? But Sukkot, you know that it's Sukkot. You can't miss the fact that it's Sukkot. Shavuot, there's nothing going on. It's true. So we learn Torah at night. Some people go to sleep and they learn Torah during the day instead, right? But it's a day that doesn't have any specific actions that go together with it. Yeah.
Surely that might be because of the fact that it was enough, as in, it could have represented the time that when we received the Ten Commandments, we were unaware of it. We didn't have. Do you know what I mean? Like we didn't know that much of that. We were unaware that we were about to receive them, kind of thing. And to just receive the Ten Commandments is therefore enough for us.
Good. You know what? Let me take it a step further, right? Which means like this. Here, let me just paraphrase what you just said.
You.
Right? Which means like this. That what are we doing on Shavuot? We're commemorating the receiving of the Torah, right? What are we doing on Pesach? We're commemorating the Exodus from Egypt. That means we've got to do a lot in order to reach that point, right? On Sukkot, what are we doing? We're commemorating the fact that the Jewish people lived inside of some kind of either spiritual booths or physical booths that they lived in during their period during the desert, right? On Shavuot, what are we doing? We're commemorating the fact that God gave us the Torah. What are we reliving over here?
Why do you use the word commemorate? Why not celebrate?
I tell you, it's interesting because the Chagim, it's not enough. It's not enough to celebrate. We wouldn't be celebrating the Chagim as a celebration alone, which means it's not enough that we left Egypt, but rather we have to reenact. We have to relive that experience. We're not just celebrating something which took place all those years ago, but rather we're tapping ourselves into the spiritual power that came together with that Exodus then. Right? In Sukkot, it's exactly the same thing. In Shavuot, we're not just celebrating the fact that 3,300 years ago we stood at Har Sinai and we received the Torah, but rather what's going on? We are reliving the experience all over again, right? Which is that Vav Sivan, the 6th day of Sivan, is a day which we have the most incredible opportunity to tap back into that tremendous spiritual dimension.
Why isn't Simchat Torah straight after Shavuot then?
Oh yeah, the sages asked the same question.
If we just received the Torah, surely
the sages asked the same question. They want to know why it is that Simchat Torah, which comes at the end of Sukkot, why doesn't it come with Shavuot? So there's a very beautiful mashal they tell like this, that there was once a king who had a beautiful daughter, and he wanted somebody to marry his daughter, but he wanted the person who married his daughter to marry her without seeing her first. And they went out to all the different princes in the area, asking if they were prepared. In the end, they found one person who was prepared to commit himself to marrying this girl without ever having seen her. So good, they get married. And then after 6 months, he comes back to the king and he says, Daddy, he says, I want to make a party, like a wedding celebration. So says the king, I don't understand. You got married 6 months ago. What do you want to make a celebration for now? So he said, when I got married 6 months ago, I had no idea who I was really getting married to. And now, 6 months later, I got to know my wife and realized just how beautiful she is on the inside and the outside. Now, I want to make a celebration so that everyone can see just how happy I really am. The Maggid Midubna, one of the great rabbis from a couple of hundred years ago, very famous for going around and telling over different parables. So he says like this, when we received the Torah at Har Sinai, we said Na'aseh v'nishma, right? We said that we'll do it, and then we'll learn about it. We didn't know what we were going to get over here. We went in blind, right? Accepting the fact that when God offers you something, then you should take it. 6 months later, then we celebrate Simchat Torah. It's a celebration of what it is.
They did not accept the Torah fully for the 6 months.
No, they did, for sure they did. But the more they got to know it, the more their appreciation was, and the more they realized just how beautiful the Torah really was. Until later on, they're ready now to celebrate what it is that they received.
Yeah, but in a weird way, surely God's presence is enough of a celebration. Then why do they also need the Torah?
If God's here, so the idea is like this: if God's celebration is enough, then you're right. But we don't need the Torah, right? However, God's coming along and he's saying like this, I'm giving you my blueprint so that you can remain attached to me the whole time.
But not only that, how do they know the stories preceding the giving of Sinai? Did God know that he was writing the Torah as time went on and he was waiting to give it?
Say again, you lost me.
So before Mount Sinai, before the whole Torah was given, where were they writing stories? Where
The stories were being written down, everything that took place from the time of Avraham Avinu until the giving of the Torah was being written down.
Then why?
It's called Sefer Brit, right? And it was a book that the Jewish people had that they were able to study. They knew it.
Then surely that we didn't really receive the Torah because they already knew about it.
No. So what they had was the narrative of the stories that took place that brought them to Har Sinai. What they didn't have, the Torah, that you have to maybe make a separation here between the Torah as a body of law, of rules, right, and the Torah that tells over the stories that we've got as well. Which means what they're receiving, when it says they receive the Torah, that the big deal about Har Sinai is not that they're receiving a book that's got the stories inside of it, but they're receiving the book that's got the laws inside of it.
But not only that, like why, on a separate note, going back to it, studying Pirkei Avot has nothing to do with what we received on Mount Sinai. Why don't we just study Torah?
we are. What is Torah? We've got Torah Shebichsav, we've got the written Torah, and we've got the oral Torah. Pirkei Avot belongs to the oral Torah. It's a Mishnah. I'll tell you more than that. The first Mishnah in Pirkei Avot says that Moshe kibel Torah b'Sinai u'masara liYehoshua, Yehoshua leZakenim, the Zakenim leNeviim, the Neviim leAnshei Knesset HaGdolah, v'heim omru. It gives you a whole introduction that Moshe received the Torah from Sinai. He passed it over to Yehoshua, who passed it over to the Zakenim, to the elders, who passed it over to the prophets, who passed it over to the men of the Great Assembly, and they said the following things. So the very simple question, why on earth, if Pirkei Avot is coming to teach us, ideas of how to become better people, and how to become more ethical, how to become more moral, then why do we need the first part of the Mishnah? Why do we need to know that Moshe received the Torah from Sinai and passed it over to Yehoshua?
Because then that means the Torah came along with this came along with
which
that.
means what's the pshat? The pshat is like this: that morals, ethics they're not cutesy things that people come up with according to the generation that they live in. Right? Real ethics are things which are anchored inside of what God's taught us. Which means that the most important lesson of Pirkei Avot are the first words of the Pirkei Avot, which don't really teach us anything at all. They just let us know that what we're learning traces its roots back to Sinai. It's very important to understand it. It really is, because otherwise the concept of the oral Torah is something which is very difficult to grasp. Yeah.
Is there any, I'm assuming, rabbis that know their trace all the way to Moshe Rabbeinu?
Yeah.
Today?
Oh, today? I don't know, but the emphasis is like this. If you come from Shevet Levi, which you've done, you're a Kohen, right? So you, in theory, can trace yourself right back to Aaron, right? Part of the problem over here is Jewish history is full of so much upheaval. I always say, one of the worst calamities of the Holocaust after the enormous loss of life was the loss of history. Whole communities were lost, just completely lost, right? And there's no history left behind. And that's why within Ashkenazi Jewry, very often people get stuck. They can go back 3 generations, 4 generations, right? But then they get stuck because they've run out of leads to be able to tie themselves back into it. By the Sfardim, so they didn't have the upheaval of the Holocaust in the same way that the Ashkenazi communities did, but they had the upheaval of the Spanish Inquisition, which means that very often Sfardim can work their way backwards. They can get back into the 1400s, and then they'll hit a brick wall because all of a sudden, these people aren't allowed to be obviously Jewish anymore, and you lose track of where things are going. However, there are definitely people, if you can trace your roots back into a prominent personality in Jewish history, then very often you can start tracing your roots back even further.
No, not personal roots. I'm saying learning roots. Let's say I learned Torah from you. You learned Torah from some other guy. Can you trace it back all the way?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's for sure, right?
People today know that?
I mean, they ought to know that. If anybody's learning Torah, the pshat is like this. If anybody's learning Torah, you need to know that what you're receiving from your Rebbe, right? He received from his Rebbe, who received it from his Rebbe, and you can go back person by person until you get back to Har Sinai and Moshe Rabbeinu, for sure.
Wow. Impressive.
It's as if we're learning directly from Moshe.
Hey, funny you should say that.
When Abraham found God, what did he find? As in, did he find a physical person?
No,
So
for
how
sure.
could he have found? One second, let me finish the question. So then, how could he have found God? You can't find someone that's not there.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Well, Avram Avinu studied every single dimension of nature, found God inside of every part of nature, but did not find any one part of nature that had more of God in it than any other. Which is, every part of nature is divine, right? What Avram didn't see was one bit of nature which was obviously greater than any other part of nature, which led him to make a quantum leap in spirituality to realize that there has to be something above that is controlling everything. For example, the difference between Aristotle and Avram Avinu is that Aristotle was a realist and he could not deal with things that were not provable. Right? Which means that as far as Aristotle is concerned, if you can't prove God, then God can't exist. Avram Avinu, on the other hand, Avram Avinu is saying that you can prove God through nature, that there has to be something above all of that which is controlling everything. Afterwards, God appeared to Avram Avinu. He spoke to Avram Avinu.
Did he then go around and say to people, "This is God, there is a God," and stuff like that?
Absolutely. Avram Avinu went around. He was the first outreach professional in Jewish history, in world history. He went around teaching everybody that there was monotheism.
And how did people react?
He was very. The Rambam said. If you look at the Rambam in the first chapter of Hilchos Avodah Zarah, the Rambam describes Avram was very effective. Very effective. He was very persuasive. It said the Rambam says that he used all kinds of things. He gave them food and he gave them drink and he joked with them and he spoke philosophy with them and he spoke theology with them. Each one according to what they needed. Right. He was very, very good at what he did. That's one of the reasons why Nimrod, the king at the time, wanted to kill him, because he was too persuasive. And Avram Avinu, he did the most incredible thing. He built up the most incredible following of people that wanted to believe in monotheism. And only later on in his life, for 30 years, he was wandering around teaching monotheism without having had God speak to him directly. Only 30 years later does God appear to him and tell him, right? That's a lech lecha mi'atzecha. For sure.
So then how did he know that there was? How did he know that that was God? If he didn't come and appear to him, how did he know?
I tell you, I've never.
Yeah,
I've never had God speak to me. I have to tell you the truth. Maybe this is the moment to let everybody here know this, but I have never had God speak to me. I don't know. I mean, we have to work on the premise that if God speaks to somebody, then the person is perfectly aware of who they're speaking to.
Yeah, but that was after 30 years, you just said.
Yeah.
So before those 30 years...
For 30 years, he's going around using his powers of persuasion to explain to people that it is inconceivable that the world does not have some kind of a controller.
So interesting.
I have a question. So, if we know that Moshe was the only person in the history of mankind that directly spoke to Hashem, right? So how did let's say Abraham speak to God? How did Noah speak? How was God's message conveyed
they
to Noah?
spoke. I don't know how to answer the question properly. I really don't. For example, when the Torah says, Vayidaber Hashem el Avram lemor, that God spoke to Avram.
Does it say that?
Yeah, but what is it? What does it mean? Does God speak? No, I mean, does God have a mouth that he speaks to somebody with? No, right? Which means that the Torah is using a language that we can relate to in order for us to be able to understand it. How did that message get to Avram Avinu? I don't really know what to tell you. I mean, maybe it was something which he just understood. Maybe it was something which was given over in a more, maybe it was given over with some kind of a physical dimension to it. I don't know.
I think I can't remember who told me this. It was understood that God had spoke to all of them, but then it says at some point, I think you said at some point, when it says panim al panim, that he was the only guy.
The quality of Moshe Rabbeinu's prophecies are different from everybody else's. That's for sure. The Rambam says that Moshe Rabbeinu is only called a prophet because there's no other word to describe him. He's not a prophet. He really isn't. He's like a super turbocharged, deluxe prophet. He's not. It's like the difference between a Ferrari and a what? And a whatever. Make your pick. It doesn't matter, right? Like a little mini minor or something. It's like you're comparing two different things. They're both called cars, but one is a car and the other one is a car, right? Moshe Rabbeinu was a Navi simply because there was no other way to describe what he was. But how did God speak to the other Nevi'im? So in visions, in dreams, were there voices? It could be. I don't know. I really don't know.
But Moshe and God face to face, they spoke. God could make himself physical. Or can he? He can't. He's not physical.
What's the problem? And anything which is physical is finite by definition, right? Which means if God makes himself physical,
but God could break that rule. Could God?
God could do.
God made that rule, right?
That's a paradoxical question.
That's the age-old question, right? Of can God create a stone which is so heavy that He can't lift it?
Yes.
Right? It's not. I don't think that the question. I don't think the question is a question. I really don't. It's like saying that you want 2 plus 2 to equal 5. It's not shaykh. It's not applicable.
I think what could be described as God manifesting Himself in a physical sense would be not that the physical part that He's manifesting isn't really part of Him, but it's
representation.
A representation.
So how did Har Sinai take place? The first 2 commandments.
Okay, have you just set me up? God.
No, honestly, these are questions I've had for a long time.
God.
But thank God, like we're
again, God spoke to the Jewish people. He gave them the first 2 commandments, one after the other. Now, to give you an idea
words, He talks.
To give you an idea of. I don't think we're talking about words as in speech the way that we're speaking now. I really don't, because it says that the Jewish people, they died, right? After the first commandment, they were so overwhelmed that they died, and God had to revive them. And then they heard the second commandment, they died again, and God had to revive them again. If we're talking about physical speech, I don't imagine that physical speech can have that kind of an effect on somebody. We're talking about a spiritual dimension, right? How did it manifest itself? Again, I don't know. I really don't know. I really don't know what it means when the Torah says that God spoke. God spoke to the Jewish people. God spoke to Moshe. God spoke to. I really don't know what that means exactly. I think that what it means is that God is transferring information, but I'm not sure how.
I think I understand why. That makes sense. Like, for example, they're standing at the thing and all of a sudden they have a revelation, boom, they die.
Something like that, yeah.
It's because we don't understand that, God wrote, I spoke.
Yeah, which means like this, right? Again, the Gemara says on many occasions that the Torah is written in the language of human beings. In order for us to be able to relate to anything that happens within inside of the Torah that's got God involved in it, it has to have some kind of a physical dimension to it because we're physical beings, right? Hey, God took us out of Egypt with an outstretched arm. Really? What does that mean? Yeah.
No, then that's representing the hand of God.
That's representing the hand of God. You hear the problem?
Yeah.
Anthropomorphism. We're talking about anthropomorphism, right? Which means that what? We have to give God physical attributes in order for us to be able to relate to what's going on. Otherwise, how are we going to do that? with physical beings, right? Everything that we relate to is being related to within the physical realms. And that includes God, right? So God spoke, and God saw, and God took us out with an outstretched arm. Did any of those things happen? No, certainly not in the way that we understand it, no.
Yeah, fine.
Okay, listen, we're going to stop over here, I guess, right?